This is a Hayward Tuck Stories recording of Some Talk of Monsters, Book 1, An English Heritage. Copyright Jack Hayward Tuck. Chapter 7, Dangerous Thoughts and Symphonies. Kip had set up his room like a museum of horrors. He had brought with him to college many of his brother's things, including Hop's diaries, the most important being the two he wrote while at college, the 1985 and the first 1986 diary. Hop had also kept a diary while living in Brighton, which was more elusive and obscure than the previous books. Then there was the grimoire Hop had started writing with Ivy Goodwin. This was full of pagan ritual magic and natural laws. There was also the black and white photograph of his brother and his friend Max together in a graveyard that Hop had given him during the Christmas holidays, as well as a sketch pad full of Hop's scary drawings. In another larger box, there was the plan and the cardboard model Hop had built for the new treehouse. This he had built during the Christmas holidays to pass the time before he would see Max again. Then there were the newspaper cuttings about his brother's murder, and boxes containing collections of his brother's oddities. These included old and strange objects he had found or made or had been given. These were all precious mementos of his brother's final years. They were more valuable to Kip than anything he had to remind himself of his own childhood. That wasn't important. These treasures were. They were all he had to keep his dear brother's memory alive. It was 6 p.m, and Sebastian would soon be knocking at his door. There was just one thing left to do. The final object Kip had to place on the shelves was a box. Kip walked over to the shelves and placed it in centre position. "Perfect," he said. "It looks fine here." Kip opened the box to reveal 80 different tiny heads, all modelled in clay from people his brother had known or hated. He had used real human hair for some, collected from the kids at school, which he had then pressed into the soft clay with a toothpick. Kip looked again at the tiny heads. Hop seemed to see people as green and scaly or covered in spots. Kip laughed as he remembered the paintings from school Mum had refused to stick on the fridge. She had said they put her off her food. All these long noses, wide jaws and sharp teeth. "Goodness gracious me," she used to say. Hop was a bit weird, Kip muttered to himself, removing one of his favourite heads from the box. An insect-shaped head it was, with black, wiry hair. Hop would often draw rows of round, bald heads in his sketchbook. He didn't take kindly to bald-headed people, especially bald women. Kip recalled how his brother had once seen bare-breasted and bald-headed women perform at Covent Garden during a Wagner opera, and how he had nightmares for years after. But luckily, it hadn't put him off the great composer, and he continued to play his music. Another thing that fascinated his brother was the smell of wood. He would spend hours in the garden shed, and making things out of wood soon became a weekend obsession. Hop would cut out the shape of rabbits from offcuts of wood. He made hundreds. They were all around the house, painted brown, never white or black. Never any new colour, just brown. He referred to these carvings as his rabbit army. They were unified and had purpose, he'd say. Every time he'd finished a new one, Kip never understood what Hop had meant. Purpose for what, Kip had wondered, and what was the significance of the rabbit? Kip rolled the tiny clay head in the palm of his hand as a knock on his door arrived on cue. He put the head back in its place and hurried to the door. "Hey," he said, noticing Sebastian's smirk. He was leaning against the door frame, hands in his pockets. "Stella's meeting us outside the mansion house. Are you ready?" "Almost," Kip said, grabbing his coat from the hook on the door. "I just need to brush my hair and clean my teeth." "Your room sure looks creepy. What is all this?" Things from home, Kip said. But your room's looking like a museum. Yes. It's just an idea I'm trying out. Something I'm thinking of setting up in the future. Yeah, crazy, Sebastian said. What is going on in that head of yours? Kip imagined a wall of shelves with rows and rows of wooden puppet heads, all displaying a variety of characteristics, but they would be mostly smiling and all very human in their monstrous caricatures. I have this idea to create a museum that displays and promotes the artwork of aspiring artists, Kip continued. But here's the original part. Artists that were unfortunately murdered before they could achieve their desired fame. Oh, well, that would be cool. Sebastian stared at a pair of trousers hung on the wall. The black pair Hop had said Max had bought him. It was all in the diary. Kip felt quite pleased with himself and smiled. These are the famous pair. How can a pair of trousers be famous? Just as King Richard's tunic is famous, or Armstrong's spacesuit, or Margaret Thatcher's handbag. Exactly. But those people were famous, Kip. And so will my brother one day. I'll see to that. Come in and sit down. I need a few minutes. Sebastian sauntered over to sit at his desk on the swivel chair. As Kip brushed his teeth in the small sink in the corner, he began swinging one way then the other while admiring his collections. This was Kip's third week at the college, and his room was finally set up how he had envisaged. Apart from the usual college furniture that came with the room, a bed, the desk and chair, and the small double-door cupboard with the standard 2 large deep drawers beneath it, Kip had introduced a shelving system along the entire back wall, which he had begged to borrow from his stepfather. It wasn't tall enough, however, to cover the 2-metre-long crack that ran up the centre of the wall. There was also a glass cabinet, small and square, and table-high that stood on 4 long legs, the type that allowed you to look at things from top down, delicate objects that needed to be protected under glass. This Kip had found in Wakefield, at a charity shop for only £10, and just had to have it. This was to form the centrepiece of his museum, and was therefore positioned in the middle of the room. I hate this crack, said Kip. I need to cover it with a poster. But I'll still know it's there. It's not that noticeable, Sebastian remarked. It freaks me out. It's just a crack. As Sebastian waited for Kip to get ready, Poppy was at her window with her binoculars again. At first she wondered who the guy talking to Sebastian was. Then realising that it was Kip, she said, Kip has dyed his hair black. And that looks like a lip piercing. Brian entered, holding a plate of sausages, shortly followed by Sarah, carrying a blue teapot with white polka dots and 4 mugs. Brian cleared his throat. I hope you don't mind, Poppy. It's all you had in the fridge. Have you seen Kip? Poppy asked. He's only gone and got piercings in his lip. I knew when that girl dyed his hair black, it wasn't to be the end of it, said Sarah. You've seen his hair then? Yes, Sarah confirmed. He took the bus into town with Stella to buy some hair dye. Hardly surprising in this place, said Poppy. He's a sweet-looking boy, and Stella's trying to turn him into a freak. You can hardly blame everything on her, said Brian. He wouldn't have done it if he hadn't wanted to. Poppy put her binoculars down and sat on the bed. Her room also looked like a museum. She had the usual bed, desk and wardrobe, just as Kip had, which was standard in every room. But each section of her wall was now shelved or covered in pictures. However, it was her collection of natural objects she had collected around the lakes with Jamie that took precedent. There were trays of dead birds and pieces of animal bone, jars of insects and rows of eggs and feathers. The smell, said Sarah, scanning the walls. How can you sleep in this room? In the centre of the main wall was a large framed poster of J.R. Oppenheimer. I really don't like that poster, she said. Poppy picked up the book she had started reading, something on pure mathematics and logic. When I was just a kid, Poppy began, times were exciting. Now we're all just waiting for something to happen. Things need to be exciting again. There's no direction. We don't know where we're going anymore. Brian looked at the animals in glass jars preserved in vinegar. There were mice and voles, frogs and newts, beetles, and lots of other misfortunate victims of Poppy's search for knowledge. Sarah picked up a jar, wiping the dust off with her sleeve. "Don't do that, Sarah," Poppy whispered. "Please." Poppy never dusted. Why would she? The dust helped her to remember how long something had been sat there, or if it had been touched or moved without her consent. A trick she had picked up after reading her collection of Conan Doyle novels. Brian, standing at the window, then said, "It's very quiet outside. Most unusual." End of chapter 7, part 1.